right, brother. It's good to have you on
Thanks.
the first podcast that we're doing, and very excited.
Thank you so much, man.
Yeah.
I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah.
I feel very honored to be selected.
So, Benjamin, how long have you been in bodybuilding?
I would say I've formally been doing bodybuilding for 10 plus years.
So, what's the parting advice? Do you have some good final thoughts that you would like to share with the audience?
Start with where you are. Small changes lead to big results in the long term. Unfortunately, the human race is still very short-term oriented.
Science makes things very easy. It prevents you from overtraining, prevents you from burning out, getting injured in the gym, and just being able to have a life outside the gym.
Hard work and determination ultimately always can help you reach your goals.
Yeah. And then in terms of diet, protein is a big macronutrient that always comes up, that how much protein should I have? Is this enough? Is eggs, protein bars? So how much protein should people actually aim for every day? All right, brother. It's good to have you on
Thanks.
the first podcast that we're doing, and very excited to talk about fitness and bodybuilding and all that stuff, and especially with a brother from California. So that's excited to have you here.
Thank you so much, man.
Yeah.
I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah.
I feel very honored to be selected.
Well, the selection criteria wasn't too high.
Oh, I'm sure it was arduous and long
Yeah.
laundry list of who makes the cut.
Absolutely. We can go with that.
Yeah.
Let's go with that. So, Benjamin, how long have you been in bodybuilding? And, how has the journey been for you? What was your background? Were you into sports before?
Sure. So I would say I've formally been doing bodybuilding for 10 plus years.
Okay.
The origin story is, the long version is walking around with muscle and fitness magazines in high school
Okay.
and flipping through that after lunch.
Yeah.
I would say the more formal experience is somewhere around 2009, 2010.
Okay.
And kind of, I'll say it, all gas, no brakes version of going into it and trying to compete, etc. Just having the mindset I was going to do it to picking up a coach and learning how to do things formally as a natural athlete, a lifetime drug-free athlete, to clarify, to where I am today, which is just still enjoying the journey and the pursuit of mastery, I would call it.
Yeah, and that's very commendable. One of the reasons that you were shortlisted or that I'm doing the podcast is it's easy to find bodybuilders, but natural athletes, especially in the sport of bodybuilding, that's just something harder to come by. And I feel a lot of people go in that journey, and at some point, they go in some other direction. But it's very commendable that you're a natural athlete. So definitely, I think kudos to that. And so now you're the bodybuilder in Prague, right? That's what you go by.
I mean, that's the marketing slogan.
Okay.
I'll call it American Bodybuilder in Prague.
Okay,
so to speak.
That's pretty interesting. Can you talk a little bit about what's PhysiqueCulture and what does it represent, and what's your goal with that? Because
Sure. So part of my personal journey and that large fluctuations in learning experience and doing things right and doing things wrong along the way, and the life lessons with that was to try and alleviate the mistakes that I made for those other people out there and share my knowledge. So out of that conception was the idea that, okay, maybe I'm reaching a point where I might be able to considered semi-qualified to give some parting advice to others.
Yeah.
And with that became the fitness coaching business, PhysiqueCulture. PhysiqueCulture is our mission is to connect natural athletes and support their fitness journey. Now, how do we do that? Well, we connect natural athletes through our social media platform. Yeah. That's PhysiqueCulture.social, which is a totally free community for people to connect and support one another with their own fitness journey.
Yeah.
And wherever they are in that journey, because it can be lots of twists and turns at different peaks and heights and altitudes, all that sort of jazz. And then to support their journey, we provide a lot of content, whether that's free on our website at PhysiqueCulture.co, to the social media platforms like Instagram, YouTube, etc., and the services we offer, which is our training as well as individualized coaching and consultation.
That sounds very exciting. I think a lot of people need that, especially, like that individualized coaching and planning, because that helps, get things on track. Because honestly, when I faced a lot of bumps during the fitness journey, and having like, someone to guide you through that, especially someone who's done it, is very, very helpful. And is that the logo of PhysiqueCulture, like right on there?
That is our logo.
Okay. It's a pretty cool logo, I would say that. Yeah,
appreciate
very
it.
Interesting. It looks like a human brain, like a guy looking down, something like that.
I appreciate it. It's definitely rooted in kind of the Greek culture to a certain degree, and a representation to a certain extent of the column.
Okay.
A good buddy of mine, we were collaborative in the sense of trying to go back to that kind of Greek ethos and mythos of aspiration of utopia.
Yeah.
And that was the birthplace of what became the monogram, which you see today.
And like Greek mythology and all that is also pretty big in like strength and bodybuilding. So I think it definitely resonates a lot with that.
I mean, at least if we're taking the essence of what we think of ancient Greek culture, it's definitely, I think, a great homage to it in the sense of utopian society. You have, I mean, not to say that it truly was, but in the abstract, at least the way I would think about it, is, a place of wisdom, a place of health, a place of aesthetic focus, at least is what gets interpreted in the art later on throughout time. So there's a lot of representation there.
Yeah, the Greek mythology is very rich in, like fitness, and kind of like the gods were like, I mean, from what I've seen, at least, my understanding.
I mean, the Mr. Olympia competition, like Mount Olympus, et cetera. So there is a little bit of that.
Yeah, so it's good that you picked Greece. It's very relevant.
Yeah.
That's nice. So, and again, like on your personal side, like how has your journey been, as like the bodybuilder in Prague, like, coming from sunny California, how do you feel about being in Prague, like from the beaches of California and doing bodybuilding there to, the winters of Prague?
Well, I think Prague is a beautiful place and has a lot of merits on its own. Like, it's very aesthetically beautiful. It's a great place to live. Yeah. It's reasonably priced, although costs are changing, of course, globally. But I'm definitely enjoying it, and it's a great place to live life a little bit in the slower lane compared to American culture, so to speak.
Yeah. I think that's a good point.
Yep.
I mean, I've been here for like a few months, and I would say like it's a nice mix of, it's a nice middle between that fast-paced American life and between, just like super sedentary. So it's definitely a great place. So guys, if you want to check it out, do that.
I would recommend stopping by, definitely.
And then, like one thing which I've seen, like what I was pointing to earlier as well, like natural bodybuilders are a pretty rare breed these days. Like, especially you go to regular gyms, there's a lot of talk about, going the other route. So, obviously a lot of respect to you for that. So what made you make the choice, like what was the pivotal point for you when you were like, hey, I want to stay natural and go that route?
Sure. I think there was several factors that went into that decision. One of the main things for me was to pursue bodybuilding in general. You kind of have to. It's a never-ending pursuit, right? Because you never know at what point can you say I have finished. I've obtained the maximum amount of outcome, muscle mass, symmetry, etc. that I'm capable of. There's never a finish line necessarily. So from that perspective, it starts to become a lifelong pursuit if you're in love with it and you want to continue to pursue it, just like anything in life. But for me, it was a combination of trying to always figure out what the puzzle pieces are to kind of keep getting a yield. And I do think whether you're natural or unnatural, there's value in just kind of taking your time to understand what is going to work for you, because hypertrophy is very individual, dose-dependent response. So there's valuable, regardless of which road you end up taking, in either case, to figure out what variables are more influential for the outcome you're looking for, more size, more symmetry, etc., to get growth to continue to happen. Beyond that, to me, the intervention of pharmaceuticals, like performance-enhancing drugs, introduces a huge amount of variability. There's a lot more things you got to control when you introduce these supra-physiological doses outside of a normal circumstance. So it beefs up the equation tremendously more that you have to account for. And, I have my own, let's say, health risks or health considerations I need to make. Yeah. Candidly, I've got high blood pressure, and I also see that if you look anecdotally at the world of, let's say, enhanced athletes, tragically, their lifespan seems to kind of get cut short in certain ways, or tragically earlier death, or so the lifespan can be at risk a little bit. Not to mention your health span.
That's right.
So for me, it was just a matter of let's stay in a slower lane. And let's focus on that pursuit of mastery to
be
kind
more
of
consistent and do it over time rather than, just like going all in, like rather than doing just like a short burst of in 1 year, I want to just like get jacked up. You want to take the
longer route and master those variables and understand those things, because in either case, if you are serious about competing at a high level, either natural or unnatural, you're going to need to uncover those variables in either case for yourself. A great counter argument would be, you've seen Arnold's program, you've seen Dorian Yates' program, you've seen Phil Heath's all top champions XY. If that is all accessible and it is the playbook for success for everyone, why doesn't everyone look like Arnold or Dorian Yates or Phil Heath or Ronnie Coleman? Because it is so individual dependent based on the stimulus and adaptation that comes in. So there's value in pursuing that regardless in either case. And on top of that, kind of alluding to genetics, how well will you respond? We don't really know. There's no way to test, like, you've got the good genetics, you're going to be a champ in advance. Like, we haven't developed that yet. So unless we're talking CRISPR technology, I don't see much value in that point. It's more about, do you love it? Do you want to continue to pursue it? And do you want to hopefully reach a place where you seem like you're getting closer to your goals, your genetic limits.
Exactly. And you kind of felt that you were achieving a lot of that just with a natural route, considering the health, the possible health side effects.
Right.
I mean, we saw what happened with Rick Piana like a few years ago. The guy just dropped dead, out of nowhere. Sure. So considering all that, I think that's a very sensible choice. That makes a lot of sense to me.
I'd rather be the jacked old guy, you know what I mean? Like with a giant winter beard, like Santa Claus, but with a six pack. Like, why not?
Like Wolverine. Right?
Sure, yeah, exactly.
Hugh Jackman.
I'm ready to jump in as a stunt double anytime, Hugh.
Oh yeah. No, I think you would do pretty good, like as stunt double. Hugh Jackman, right? What's his name?
Yeah, Hugh Jackman.
Hugh Jackman, you'll do pretty good for that.
I appreciate it.
To add the claws.
I need to add some claws,
and that's pretty much you're good to go. Yeah. But that's nice. No, that's great. I think and even for me, like fitness wise, that's what I always emphasize to people. During in my Instagram and on my social media, that playing the long game is so important. Like it's not like a 5-year journey or a 10-year journey. Your body is your temple. You need to think of it as something which is going to carry you till the next 60 or 70 years.
Sure.
So taking care of it is the most vital thing, and I appreciate you taking that. That's very commendable that you're taking the long kind of road.
I always tell people, you got to forget the destination, you got to embrace the journey.
Yeah, I put a post on that recently. So.
Yes.
No, that's right. And I mean, if you're enjoying the game, if you're having fun during it, gaining muscle, enjoying process, I mean, there is nothing better than that.
Absolutely. And the good thing is too, if you really feel like you need a break, the gym's always going to be there. Yeah. You can always come back to it. Yeah. It doesn't have to be this continuous, head against the wall, bull chasing red kind of experience. You can, throttle up and get aggressive, and then you can throttle back down and get into the slow lane and put it on cruise control. Yeah. As is with life.
Yeah, and I think that's the good thing with natural bodybuilding is that the muscle hypertrophy, once you attain it, even if you're not working out for a few weeks, you just take a few weeks off, the muscle doesn't decline so fast. It stays, because rather than from what I've heard and I've seen is that when you're on like substances and you stop taking the substances, like it just like really dips. And you can still maintain a good quality and good amount of muscle and just take a few weeks off, like chill off and take a vacation.
Absolutely. Atrophy does not occur acutely unless you're in a caloric deficit, and there's some factors with nutrition, of course, adequate protein intake, etc. So your gains are not going to disappear in 1 week.
Unless you're drinking every night or doing crazy shit like that. Like,
Right.
it's pretty much gonna stick. And I think that's one of the reasons for me also. I was like never into any of the performance enhancing stuff. I was like, I want to get something which I can maintain over the years and then just keep on working on it little by little. That's great. And again, a follow up on that is like, what, because I think, and this the audience will find very interesting, because a lot of people face that point in their career where they stop seeing gains. So, what made you stick with your choice over the years? Like, was there a moment of doubt in your career where you were like, hey, all my friends are, probably, or my buddies at the gym, they're like growing faster and stronger, and, maybe I want to try a little bit of stuff like.
Sure. So I would say that there's definitely points of reaching a plateau or growth slowing down. I think for me, it was never really a question of should I introduce substances to provoke a stimulus in a pharmaceutical sense. But for me, it was just more about figuring out the equation like, okay, what must I be doing incorrectly? Because you'll, at some point during your career as a physique athlete, whether you're recreational or competitive, you begin to realize with time that what got you here is no longer appropriate for things to continue to progress, for adaptation to continue to be stimulated. So at some point you have to reflect on the rearview mirror of like, which roads have I taken to got where I am today, and what kind of adjustments do I need to make to continue to provoke these adaptations to occur, to stimulate differently in a way that provokes adaptation, more muscle growth. And that happened to me many times. There was periods where I just figured the main answer to the question, like how do I keep gains coming, is more volume, right? Because volume, as many the bros will tell you, is that the highest correlation with muscle hypertrophy. More volume, more gains. And yes, it is a dose-dependent response, but it is not a linear response, which means that I cannot continue to pile on more and more volume
and just keep on expecting
and expect gains. In the long term, short term, yes, it can work to a certain degree. You can throttle up, just think a car. You're in fourth gear, and you're going to shift up to fifth or sixth gear for a while. But if you maintain that speed on the engine and that horsepower, eventually you'll degrade the engine a little bit, and you have to shift back down into a lower gear. So, and that brings back to that idea, too, of this individual response. So there's a range, absolutely, but there is also a secret sauce to make the perfect perfection for the individual, right? And it's worthwhile taking the time to figure out what that area is. Most people might respond better to moderate volume as opposed to high volume.
That's a good point.
So it's worth taking the time to kind of figure out that sauce. And also, too, life gets in the way. Adherence is very important out of it. If you're going to sit there and do 24 sets for chest, it's ridiculous. It's not sustainable. You're going to burn out.
Yeah, and that's the thing. A lot of the people, there's a lot of that bro workout idea still out there. Like Monday is chest day. It's supposed to be International Chest Day. Like that's what a lot of people say. And it's just like I see people repping out just like reps and reps. Like some people will just spend like 45 minutes right at the bench press, and I mean God knows how many sets they're doing. But I think the point that you're raising is you got to be more scientific about it. Like you need to understand what's gonna cause maximum hypertrophy, and that's where maybe a good coach like you, or like you guys come in, where you guys can educate on like, hey, what's the optimum point for you guys, and you don't need to go beyond that, because it's just like it's muscle atrophy, or you'll just overburn yourself, and it's probably pointless.
Yeah, I think relying on scientific evidence and being evidence-based is a great way to be in either case to help perpetuate your outcome. Science is not perfect, but it's one of the best tools we have to approach the world around us and understand the world around us.
Amen to that. I 100% agree. Like anything, may it be fitness, may it be diet, like the more scientific you're about it, and that's the whole, because I'm a scientist by profession, like the science makes things very easy. It prevents you from overtraining, prevents you from burning out, getting injured in the gym, and just like being able to have a life outside the gym. Otherwise, you'll spend hours and hours and, like a gym rat.
I mean, science can help and the data can help inform our decisions in all aspects of life.
Yeah. So I think one big point which, Benjamin and me both are trying to strike here is that, you don't need to because in Asia especially, you'll go to the gyms and you'll see because growing up, I grew up in New Delhi, and then you walk in the gym and then you lift for 6 months, and the seventh month, the trainers are trying to, maybe it's not so big in the States, but they're trying to shove down drugs, and they'll be like, hey, you're not gaining muscle. Why don't you try this or that? And I see so many people fall into that trap and, mess up their fitness journey and mess up their health. And because they're still young, they just want to look a certain way and they get into all this stuff. And then, when it's just it's a very hard life after that. So, I mean, the whole point is that, you don't need to do that. If you're more scientific, I mean, looking at Benjamin and a lot of the other natural athletes, you can gain a lot of good muscle. This guy has a lot of good muscle. So it's you can gain a lot of good muscle. It's just that you gotta pursue it more scientifically and have a more long-term approach than just okay, I want to look ripped in 6 months. What's the point?
I would definitely say that unfortunately the human race is still very short-term oriented. We're short-term incentive oriented. So I can understand that the appeal is very high to very quickly achieve maximum results or maximum output, whatever that conception happens to be. But in either case, what you learn to realize with wisdom is that hard work and determination ultimately always can help you reach your goals. It may not be a linear route. You may get zigs and zags while you're climbing up the mountain, but the point is you can make progress that way, and it's again that kind of pursuit of mastery to kind of continue after it, as opposed to focusing on too short-term oriented, and that's not really sustainable when you have that kind of mentality anyways. So it makes more sense to just pursue what you enjoy, and eventually it will come to you.
Exactly.
Rather than chasing after it.
Yeah. Then in terms of diet, protein is a big macronutrient that always comes up, that how much protein should I have? Is this enough? Is this not enough? You have protein shakes, protein bars. So how much protein should people actually aim for every day?
Sure. If you're looking to maximize muscle growth, 1.6 grams per kilo, about 0.7 grams per pound is appropriate to maximize muscle growth. Now, you may want to be a little bit over that for body composition or other outcomes, but that's what the data seems to point to.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I think that 0.7 to 1 range, which is 0.7 grams per pound to 1 gram per pound, that's what I've seen as well. Just a personal thing. At one point, I was doing 1.3 or 1.4. So you can totally overdo on the protein as well, because I was overdoing at some point, because once you get into it, then sometimes you lose track of it and you can end up doing 1.3, 1.4, 1.5. I was doing 1.5 gram per pound, and I went to my dietitian and she's like, that's a shit ton of protein. How are you even eating that much? And I was like, chicken curries, salmon for dinner, and protein shakes. She's like, we need to slow down on that. So it's a double-edged sword.
Certainly.
So can you talk a little bit more about what's the role of diet, and what are the major components that people should think about? Maybe just high-level things that people should look out for when thinking about diet, considering how crucial it is.
Sure. So I think from a nutritional aspect, biggest order is about energy balance.
Okay.
Right? Whether you're looking to lose weight and or body fat or gain muscle, and working your way towards a surplus in order to build a larger skyscraper, so to speak, in that analogy. Within that, you might want to consider your macronutrients in terms of the amount of protein, fats, and carbohydrates you'll be taking in. From a fats perspective, a good baseline is roughly about 1 gram per kilo for hormonal health and general well-being. When it comes to carbohydrates, a good baseline is 3 grams per kilo or more, roughly, to ensure that you have saturated the amount of glycogen stores for performance. So that's kind of a minimum baseline. When it comes to protein, which we've talked about before, we've got roughly that 1.6 grams per kilo, which translates to 0.7 grams per pound in order to help maximize the adaptations for muscle building purposes. Now, those are some kind of baselines, and then, of course, you've got wiggle room with where you want to take it from there.
I think it comes down to around like 60 to 70 grams of good quality fat, and then like around 220 to 30 grams of carbs, and maybe 150 to 170 or something like that. I mean, depending. Of course, it's got to be more for you.
Depending on the individual, yes.
Depending on but like an average, let's say 5'10", 5'11", let's say 180 pound start of someone like me.
So basically you. We'll start with you.
Yeah, that's I was doing the math in my mind when you were, that's when I see numbers, I just like automatically go to the math. But that makes
the relevant.
Yeah. And what's your take on the quality of the ingredients though? So I think macro wise we understand that all these three are very important things, but like and then we did talk about the energy surplus and a deficit, but like, is it enough to just be in a deficit, or the quality of what you're eating is pretty important as well?
Well, certainly when we're talking about the quality, what comes to mind first is fiber, which is often very overlooked.
Okay.
When it comes to fiber, fiber is help for the gut microbiome. It helps to keep you regular too, and all those wonderful aspects. So off the top of my head, dietary fiber is somewhere around, I think it's 10 grams per 1,200 calories or 1,500 calories. So let's say when you get up about 3,000 or so, we're looking at about 40-ish grams
of fiber
per day. Now, if we're talking about things like organic or inorganic food, I would defer to someone more versed in the nutrition aspects of it for what might matter there. But generally speaking, good quality food, good quality whole foods is a place to start for a corner diet.
What are like some of the main ingredients which are there in your pantry? Like, I'm curious, like as a bodybuilder, like what's staple?
Oh gosh, for me, it's a lot of produce, especially during prep on lower calories. Whole food sources are a big part of my personal diet, and especially contest prep, mainly because you're looking for high nutrient density, but low caloric density. So relying a lot less on processed foods makes sense, especially when you're in reduced calories.
That's impressive. The more I talk to you, the more I feel you're like a very longevity-focused bodybuilder, because you'll see a lot of people, they're like beef jerky and all that processed stuff. But I mean, and again, that's nutritionally very rich, but from a longevity perspective or from an overall health perspective, probably it's debatable. But again, the focus on like whole foods, like natural produce, like what's in the market, I think that's it's so much aligned not just with bodybuilding but with like living a longer and healthier life that I think I agree with you. That's a great way to go.
Appreciate it.
Sir, again, do you have like some more interesting practical takeaways which people can keep in mind when they're actually going to the gym, especially in terms of technique and volume and all that stuff?
Sure. So I think one of the big things to consider is using more weight doesn't necessarily need to be the only strategy you implement. When we're talking about progression, you can use, let's say, more unconventional or less popular tactics for progression. Of course, weight is one of them, or more reps is one of them as well. But you can think of less conventional things like range of motion, increasing your range of motion, and focusing on that increased range of motion can help further hypertrophy as well. For example, introducing deficits. For example, even as simple as push-ups. Deficit push-ups can be a great alternative exercise as well. Something you can even do at home. Doesn't even need to be at the gym.
Looks cool as well. It's just like a little bit different.
Yes, certainly.
The guy who's doing the deficit push-ups in the gym, you're like, it's like immediate respect. You're like, he's doing something, like which looks different from the guy on the bench press, which you see all the time.
So range of motion is definitely one of those areas I like to emphasize. There's a lot of emerging research coming out on the value of range of motion, and more specifically, the lengthened portion of an exercise. So being able to almost elucidate a stretch during an exercise can help provoke hypertrophy as well. Kind of one of the reasons that passive stretching can also lead to muscle hypertrophy as well. So that mechanical tension relationship and interplay with the positioning of a muscle can be very helpful as well.
Sense. I think that's an interesting one. Like just having that higher range of motion. Something which I started to experiment with, and my trainer put in my program. It was like controlling the negative portion, the eccentric and even the concentric portion of the lift. So you'll do this like a squat with like a 3 second down, and you stop at the bottom of the squat for 3 seconds, and then you go up again 3 seconds, and that's so much more harder than just squatting like say 225 or 250. Like controlling the lift, and it just puts so much pressure on the muscles. Like you can feel the burn just after 2 reps. It's so much time under tension.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think something to consider, going back to that idea that we've mentioned before, is like first quality, then quantity is baked into one of our beliefs. Range of motion is one of them, and controlled movement is a big part of that as well, to your point exactly, of controlling the eccentric portion of the lift can be a little bit even more valuable than the concentric, which is the shortening aspect of the muscle. Yeah. So that lengthening part can be very provoking for growth.
And then that does promote hypertrophy, right? Because I saw this, I think this gymnast, just some guy on Instagram, and the guy was very beefed up, like extremely, a lot of hypertrophy and muscles. And I mean, then when they asked him, he's like, I never hit the gym. It's all from, and like there was a whole article on what he does, and what he actually does is just like, he doesn't do like typical curls or squats. He does a lot of holds. Like he'll just hold in a static position because that's what a lot of gymnasts do. And even that itself can promote so much hypertrophy.
Yes, again, there's many strategies that can provoke a stimulus when it comes to muscle hypertrophy. To your point exactly, gymnasts are pretty jacked. Yeah. And why are they jacked? Well, they tend to put a lot of effort into more isometric type holds. Yeah. Their range of motion might be a little bit different, but they can still get a great stimulus. Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily need to be by weights. It can be body weight. Yeah. That mechanical tension relationship is still very much in play.
Yeah. So it's just like a lot of avenues to get to that point. I mean, I did see this Cirque du Soleil show in Miami, like I think a few months ago, and I was fascinated. Like all the acrobats were just like super jacked. Mm-hmm. And maybe they hit the gym as well, but I think it's got to do a lot with, like what they do as a part of their work, like just like holding people and just like jumping and stuff, and just those isometric holds, like it's a good side effect of what they do.
There's a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of ways to get to it. You can even look at ballet too. If you look at men and women in ballet, they're especially on the lower body, and their full body is very much more has a lot more muscle mass, at least compared to general population. Yeah. So there's a lot of avenues you can take on it. It doesn't have to be one size fits all. I
want to hear from you, like especially as someone who's an expert in this area, like how actually does muscle hypertrophy work? Because one of the questions I get a lot, and I'm sure everyone finds very interesting, is like, hey, all this is fine, but bottom line, how do I gain muscle? Like, how do I get started?
Sure. So how it happens is one thing, and we've got three major explanations for that. The first and leading is mechanical tension. Putting tension on skeletal muscle leads to a stimulus and adaptation. Simple stressor, if you were to think of it, or stimulus. The second pervading theory is metabolic stress. The idea that you can get some amount of cell swelling to a degree that invokes adaptation, so growing muscle, the hypertrophy response to that. Mm-hmm. And then the third one is muscle damage, which is kind of a more lagging theory, with the first two kind of leading the headway, mechanical tension and metabolic stress being those first two. Now, when it comes to the practicality, or let's say the ingredients for provoking muscle hypertrophy or growing muscle, we have a recipe, and you can use the analogy basically to bread. We've got volume, which is the total amount of physical work you're going to do. And we can slice that in terms of, let's say, for a session, for a week, for a month, for a training program. So volume is the first variable. Okay. And that's the one people most think of that is tightly regulated or correlated with muscle hypertrophy, which is true. It is very dose-dependent response. Yeah. But it is not a linear response, which is important to understand as well. So I start with 1 and I get 1. I move to 5, I get 5.
Yeah.
It is not necessarily true. I get to 20 and I get 20. It's an output. So that's important to realize. The second important variable is frequency.
Okay.
Which is really just a means of how do I distribute this work that I'm going to do between 1 session, 2 session, etc. in the case of perhaps a week. And then the third variable is intensity. How hard am I going to work? To what degree do I throttle the engine, so to speak? So if we think of that recipe of bread, volume would be analogous to flour.
Okay.
And then you have frequency, which would be more analogous to water.
Okay.
And then intensity would be, let's say, analogous to yeast.
Okay.
So those are the 3 main ingredients I need to create bread.
And which ones would you say, like, which is the most important ingredient, or it's like every one of them is kind of equal?
Sure. So, of course, going back to volume would be the biggest one.
Okay.
Because flour, if you think about it, how much bread can I possibly make? It's going to be dependent on flour being the major limiting factor. The water is there to help distribute the mixture and create your dough, and then the yeast is just going to help it rise. How fluffy does it become? Equivalent to the intensity. So if we think about that, we have now the 3 major ingredients. Now, of course, there's other variables to consider, but I would kind of urge those to be considered as more as the herbs and spices that you can throw in to make one particular loaf of bread more unique than another. Are you making focaccia, or are you doing sourdough? Is this rye bread, whole grain, white bread, etc.? So when we think about those other variables, that's what it kind of starts to come to when outside of the 3 major.
Got it.
This volume, frequency, and intensity.
Those are the 3 main things, like especially when people go to the gym, like they should keep that in mind when they're thinking about like gaining muscle, like how much is the volume, how hard they're going. And then the third one was frequency.
Yes. Those 3 are the primary ingredients, the recipe, so to speak. So those should be considered in any type of training program.
Okay.
Now, it doesn't mean you shouldn't put any sort of emphasis on the other variables, those herbs and spices, because they can be highly influential as well. When we think about throughout time, how am I going to ensure progress through whether it's the course of a week, a month, or a year, and now we're talking about the idea of progression, there's a number of things that you can kind of throw in there that are going to make the outcome more fruitful and unique. And those are things like you consider range of motion or advanced training techniques that can influence the output. So again, if we think about the 30,000-foot view, we're thinking about stimulus provoking adaptation. That's what we're doing. That is the ultimate first order principle we're shooting for.
So, as we wrap up this podcast, and I think it was a great discussion overall on a lot of topics, hypertrophy, likes, dislikes, diet and stuff. So what's the parting advice? Do you have like some good final thoughts that you would like to share with the audience on like some good things which they can incorporate in their workouts or daily life to be more fitter and healthier?
Some easy takeaway stuff. Start with where you are. Small changes lead to big results in the long term. If you are not used to the gym, you can start by just implementing a little bit of walking. 7,500 steps per day can help reduce cardiovascular and all-cause mortality by 50%.
That's crazy.
As a general rule of thumb. So even just a simple walking is very highly underrated as a way to improve your fitness and lifestyle and increase your health span.
Okay.
When it comes to resistance training, start with where you are. A minimum dose response for muscle hypertrophy would be as little as 4 sets per muscle per week. So you can cut that down to a 30-minute workout, in and out, and be done and get an effective stimulus for someone who's a more novice or intermediate athlete.
Just start at it. Rather than thinking how much, just do something.
Don't think of optimal. Chase mastery, not perfection. It's more valuable. I tell people, first quality, then quantity. Stay humble and focus on what you can.
I think those are some good takeaways. But I had a personal question which, always bugs me and bothers me. Is like, how long does it actually take you to see results? Like, as someone who just started lifting or has been doing it for a while, like, what's the timelines like?
Right. So, stimulating adaptation takes time. For visible results, I tell people at least 8 to 12 weeks. So be consistent about what you're doing and then assess after that time period before making any adjustments.
Check out, the bodybuilder in Prague. Go to the gym, hit out a few sessions with him. Like, he'll be happy to, show you guys some of the ropes.